You are watching Frankly Speaking Sports, live from Charlotte, North Carolina. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another episode of College Football Tuesday. I'm your host, Larry Frank, with Zach McKinnell. And Zach, I thought about what is the best way to start off today's show. I know a lot of people watch us on the replay because we share it afterwards. And I know we get some folks on live as well. But the only way I could think of starting off the show before we get into some of the highlights of the game this weekend is what's wrong with the ACC?
Everything is wrong with the ACC. I mean, you look at, I believe I think every ranked team in the ACC lost this weekend because UNC got upset by Georgia Tech out of nowhere. Clemson gets demolished, or not demolished, but they get upset by NC State. I mean, it was just a bad weekend overall. And then you look at the ACC right now, you could make an argument that the two best teams in the ACC right now are Wake Forest and Boston College.
Yeah. And I mean, if you look at it, like you said, they're both 4-0. And Boston College, actually, this weekend is their first conference game of the year. They haven't played a conference game. Wake Forest has played two, and they're 2-0. And what I think happened this weekend by NC State beating Clemson, it kind of opened up the ACC because Boston College and Wake Forest, and we'll talk about that a little bit later, they got some tough schedules ahead of them. They got to play, conference play, and, a lot can happen between now and then. You see a team like NC State, who emerged and beat Clemson last week. You start to wonder, is NC State that good or was Clemson that bad?
For me, it's a little bit of both. I thought NC State did exactly what I thought they couldn't do. I'd said in my preview on our channel that they had to run the ball and then let Devin Leary do his thing, and they stuck with their game plan, and it ended up working down the stretch. And for me, I'm looking at the Atlantic Division right now, and right now, I think you could say Clemson might be the fourth best team in their division right currently. And that's not even including the Coastal, where you could make an argument that Clemson might be the sixth or seventh best team in the ACC right now. And
yeah, it's amazing. Amazing.
Yeah, I mean, you're looking at that Georgia Tech game now. Like, if Georgia Tech gets that 2-point conversion, they don't make that goal line stand, you're talking about Clemson could potentially be 1-3 right now with their only win coming over South Carolina State, which is a FCS team. And in that FCS game, DJ threw 2 interceptions as well. He didn't look great even against lesser competition. And then on top of that, coming out of this weekend, I don't know how many people knew this, Will Shipley's going to be out for an extended amount of time, which is their number one running back. And then Brian Barisi, the number one defensive tackle, tore his ACL and will be out for the year. So it's just compound problem after compound problem. And then James Skalski is going to be out for an extended amount of time. You're looking at Clemson right now and wondering, man, how does Dabo Swinney even salvage this schedule? And then you're looking at this week, they have a game against Boston College at 6:30 on Saturday night. If they lose that game, the wheels could fall off of this team. And for me, this is as much of a must-win for Clemson this weekend over Boston College as I think that Dabo Swinney and Clemson have ever faced in his time at Clemson.
And we're going to get to the previous game and the upcoming game in a little bit. But you talked about it. Obviously, the only thing making Clemson look good in that Atlantic Division is a team called Florida State. If it wasn't for Florida State, Clemson would be at the bottom. But also the ACC, the Coastal Division, when you look at that, and, every team has a loss. every single team in the Coastal Division has a loss. Virginia Tech, Duke, and Pittsburgh all with one loss. Miami, the Tar Heels, and Virginia all with 2 losses. So this is just, you look at this and you go, wow, one of the most powerful, I wouldn't call it powerful. I've always thought the SEC was better, but at the end of the day, it was a powerful division is really turning the other way right now. And, some will look at it, if you're an ACC fan, you're like, oh my God, terrible for the ACC. But if you're a college football fan, you're saying, wow, it's good to get some different teams besides the Clemsons and those schools in there. So, it's, I look at it as, I'm not happy for Clemson, obviously. I'm not a Clemson fan, but you hate to see a team that has done since 2008 has just been, near the top every year. It's just different. And, I love the opportunity it presents for, like you mentioned, a Wake Forest and a Boston College, who are both 4-0 and with some big games this weekend. But let's talk about that game. The NC State 27-21. And basically, this is what I realized. And you tell me if I'm pretty accurate. Clemson is a one-dimensional team. They're a defensive team. If they give up points to someone, they can't scrap back and fight back into these games where they can score enough point with DJ at quarterback, who, I am not a big, I have not been a huge fan of him. I don't dislike the guy. He's just not Trevor Lawrence. And, at the end of the day, it shows with this offense that, it's not good.
Yeah. And, 2 stats. So as I was looking at this game, I watched it twice, actually. I watched it again before our recap on our channel. The 2 stats that defined the night and that really solidified what NC State did were the time of possession battle and the third down efficiency. For the time of possession, NC State held the ball for almost 42 minutes of this game, and Clemson held the ball for 18 minutes. They had it for a quarter and 3 minutes for the entire game. I don't care what defense you're looking at. If you're Alabama, if you're the Patriot, I don't care what level of football you're playing, how much depth you think you have. If you're on the field for 42 minutes in any type of football game, you're going to get worn down. And that's what you saw in overtime is Devin Leary and this running game was able to take advantage of that. And then the lack of a run game for Clemson, being one-dimensional, kept them in 3rd and long all night. NC State, I guess, got 11 of their 21 third down attempts. Clemson was 2 for 11. NC State, due to sticking with the run, was able to stay in 3rd and short, and therefore they were able to be creative with their play calling. But with Clemson, they were constantly in 3rd and 8s, 3rd and 9s, 3rd and 11s. And I don't care how good of a team you are, you cannot lose the time of possession in battle like you did, on top of finding yourself in 3rd and long constantly. And it was just both sides of the ball had one of their worst games of the season. As much as it's about how bad Clemson played, on the same token, you have to give NC State credit. Devin Leary played arguably one of his best games of his career. 4 touchdowns, 0 turnovers. Person Jr. and Zonovan Knight did their thing on the ground, and that's what I want to say for NC State. They showed this weekend that even if it's not perfect, and this is the same thing I'm going to talk about with Arkansas, Georgia later today, even if you can't consistently move the ball for 4 or 5 yards on the ground, you cannot abandon the run. They ran the ball almost 50 times for 170 yards, and even when it wasn't working, they never got away from their game plan, and that's always the key when you pull an upset off like this. So you got to give NC State and Dave Doran and that coaching staff all the credit in the world.
Yeah, and, I was going to mention Devin Leary, too. I always say, I don't care what they do when they play these no-name teams. You and I can get out there and probably stack up 400 yards passing, this or that. But Devin Leary showed me something. Here he is playing one of the, whether Clemson is playing good or not good, they are one of the best defensive teams in the nation. and that's the only side of the ball they do play well on. He threw for 288 yards. You said 4 touchdowns, and he didn't make any mistakes. You got to give the kid credit. In the big game on the big stage, he delivers. And how about Emeka Emezi? 14 receptions, 116 yards, 1 touchdown. They were hitting, matching each other up all day long, Leary and him. And the only thing, and we'll talk about this a little later when we get into some of the games next week, that NC State scares me about, because I think they got a pretty good, well-balanced team despite the 1 loss, but that offensive line seems to keep Leary on the run too much instead of, protect them. They had the one thing, and it is Clemson, I understand that, but 3 sacks, you got to protect your quarterback, and we'll hit on that a little bit later when we get to the matchups next week, but I thought NC State, it wasn't something that surprised either of us. We thought Clemson might win, but we said we wouldn't be surprised if NC State came out and played their game, they would win it. If you remember before the season started, NC State was both of ours pick of the year that might be, a team to watch. And right now, with only 1 loss in that conference, they very well could win that conference based on a couple of things going that way.
Absolutely. I mean, you got to right now. You could argue that them, Wake Forest, and Boston College are in the driving seat. The only sad part is, due to the college football playoff only being 4 spots, the ACC is virtually eliminated. I would say a 0, and I'd never say never. There's a 0% chance that anyone from the ACC gets into the playoffs.
What happens if Boston College goes undefeated?
I don't think they would get above 7th in the rankings.
Even if they went undefeated?
Because the problem with them is that Oregon won that Ohio State game. That was the biggest detriment to the ACC. The ACC had to have Oregon lose that game. So if Oregon, let's just say Oregon wins out, the SEC champ, regardless of who it is going to be in there. And it's probably either going to be Alabama or Georgia. And then on top of that, you're going to most likely have Oklahoma, because as bad as they've played, Ben, let's just be honest, no one in the Big 12 has played any sort of football to make me think they can knock Oklahoma off.
Right.
And then that last spot, you're probably going to have a Big 10 champ, whether it be Penn State, Iowa, or Ohio State, who's already all in the top 10 or top 11. Then you're going to have Cincinnati or Notre Dame. Whoever wins that game this weekend is going to have a fast track to that playoff spot. And on top of that, you also have some of those 1-loss teams hanging around, because what happens, man, if there's a 1-loss Georgia or 1-loss Alabama hanging around and their only loss is in the SEC championship to the other team? Can you make an argument Boston College belongs in over those teams? I don't think the playoff committee will do that. So for me, when you look at the pecking order, it's going to be a real tough task for them to get in that playoffs. And then if Ohio State only has 1 loss at the end, I think they would be willing to put Ohio State in over Boston College, even if they were undefeated.
Yeah. Well, we got to remember a couple of things, and we're going to we'll click over the Boston College game. But the one thing you got to remember is it's been a crazy year so far. So we don't know there's a lot of football to be played. So a lot is based on, obviously, the results of these games coming up. But as far as we're concerned, ACC right now, let's stay with it. Boston College with a huge win over Missouri in overtime. And I got to watch this game. This is the game I was watching. I'm going to tell you something. I got to see Pat Garwo live run for Boston College. What a great running back he is. I looked at this game and I wasn't really sold on Grosel as a quarterback here for Boston College. He didn't do anything to lose the game, but he didn't seem to me like he's that high-profile quarterback. The good thing about him is no mistakes. He threw 2 touchdown passes. But I know you were talking about in the Clemson, North Carolina State game about 3rd down conversions. Okay, Boston College, 10 of 16 on 3rd down and 2 for 2 on 4th down. Okay, that's a formula for success. When you're sustaining long drives, you had a Garwo with 175 yards rushing. This guy was all over the place. When you sustain those long drives and ride that clock, baby. And at the end of it, as long as you're putting points on the board, it's an equation that leads to a successful result. And that's what happened. And give Missouri credit. They hung out. It was a great game. But also give credit to BC for holding Missouri under 100 yards rushing in that game. And then you had Basilic that had to become one-dimensional and had a pretty good game, but he threw 2 big interceptions that cost him dearly.
Yeah, the number one thing I noticed about Boston College is that run game finally came alive. You mentioned 275 yards rushing and 3 rushing touchdowns. Last year, with Djokovic at quarterback, they were way too one-dimensional in the biggest games, which is why they could not escape with the Clemson, Notre Dame, or UNC upset last year, which really hurt them. They were my other sleeper pick to start the season. The worst thing for the ACC is if Boston College has a run game. If they can establish the run, this team's going to be very hard to beat. I'm still so impressed. He's one of my favorite wide receivers in the country. Zay Flowers for this Boston College team is legit. He was the leading wide receiver again. I believe he had 8 catches, 62 yards, and a huge touchdown in this game. So for me, Boston College is showing that they're not just a pass-heavy team, which they were last year. If they can run the ball, Boston College can beat anyone on their schedule moving forward.
Yeah, and I'll tell you what, it was a nice win. They went to 4-0. Now them and Wake Forest are 4-0. And we're going to move right up the next game talking about Wake Forest. Big win. Huge win for Wake Forest. I mean, you can say what you want. They're 4-0. They're winning. I thought both quarterbacks in this game looked good. I thought Brennan Armstrong looked real good. Threw for another 400 yards, 2 touchdowns. The problem is he was running for his life the entire game here. He was sacked 6 times, Zach, in this game. Wake Forest had over 200 yards rushing combined in this game, but all day long, Armstrong was under pressure.
Yeah, for me, the biggest difference between Wake Forest this year and years past is Sam Hartman's development at quarterback. This kid is finally living up to all the hype. As you know, he was the star of QB1 on Netflix in high school, so he's not afraid of the spotlight at all. And this year, he's already thrown 9 touchdowns, 1 interception. He has his highest completion percentage of his career at 66%. If he can continue this type of production, Wake Forest is going to be tough to beat, and they can run the ball too. They have 3 running backs in Ellis and Turner, Beal Smith, that can all be featured backs. They ran for 200 yards on Friday night when they faced Virginia. I thought they did a great job of making Virginia, on the other hand, one-dimensional by stopping that run game. When your quarterback, and Armstrong played well, when you have 59 passing attempts for your quarterback, it is so hard to win the game. And so for me, they made Virginia one-dimensional while keeping their offense balanced, and Sam Hartman is just proving time and time again that he's to be respected. And there's an argument you can make right now that Hartman has been the most impressive quarterback in the ACC this year so far through the season.
Oh, yeah, and he threw 3 touchdown passes again, like you said, on Saturday. Just a great game. And you look at Wake Forest, and, nobody out of all the Carolina teams, nobody even said anything about them at the beginning of the year. They're just quietly coming in, executing. I think that's the right word. Executing the great game plan that's put together for them, and they're prevailing. And just a great game by Wake Forest, who is now 4-0. But, probably the one team in all of the NCAA, they're not a great team, but they do one thing well. They win. And when you look at this score, 41-13, you say, holy cow, Notre Dame just blew them out. But if you watch this game, you would have realized for the first 3 quarters, this was a hell of a defensive game. It was a 10-10 game going into fourth quarter. You get a couple of pick sixes, and, I mentioned that I was, for Wisconsin, I already said they were a good defensive team, and they proved that to the fourth quarter. But then you saw the mistakes of Graham Mertz. take over that game. He threw, was it 2 or 4 interceptions? I believe in that game.
I believe it was 4.
4 interceptions, I believe, in that game, but it was 10-10. Then Notre Dame scores 31 points in the fourth quarter. Jack Cohn, give the guy credit, man. This is the stats don't do justice for this young man, because if you look at him and you see he only throws for 158 yards, a touchdown, you're like, average statistics, but he doesn't make mistakes. The kid doesn't cost his team or gives up points. And once again, we talked about it on the previous games about running for his life. He was sacked, I believe he was sacked 5 times in this game. So the Wisconsin defense, until the mistakes by Graham Mertz, really held their own. But after that, 4 interceptions. I think, like I said, don't quote me, I thought 2 of them were ran back to the house, and then the game ends up 41-10.
Yeah, and they also had a kickoff return too that put points on the board after a big drive by Wisconsin. So Wisconsin goes down and scores, then you give up a huge kickoff return to Tyree, the backup running back. Now, I thought Drew Payne, once Cohen went down, I was very impressed with Payne's ability to come in and perform. He led 2 scoring drives. He got 10 points on those. But you mentioned this, man. Everyone gives Notre Dame flack for not looking impressive. But you can say what you want about this team, but they find a way to win, pretty or not. And they could have weaknesses here or there, but they still win. They've shown that they can win on the ground with Kyron Williams by establishing the rushing game. They showed this weekend that they can rely on special teams and defense. And then in that Florida State game, they showed that Jack Cohen can lead them to victory through the air. Week in and week out, they keep proving everyone wrong. And as long as they keep winning, more and more people are going to have to start putting respect on Notre Dame's name. Now, the one thing I thought they did outstanding this weekend that no one's talking about is how good that young, inexperienced front 7 for Notre Dame did in stopping the running game of Wisconsin. They held them to 75 yards rushing, no rushing touchdowns, and only 2.5 yards per carry. That is why Mertz was put in such a bad position. And if you're Wisconsin, you have to look at yourself in the mirror and say, is Graham Mertz really the answer for our future? Because time and time again, he comes up majorly short in the biggest games on your schedule. So I don't know what the backup situation exactly looks like off the top of my head, but you have to wonder if Mertz is the right move for the future of your program.
Yeah, and one of the biggest games of last week, and we waited almost to the end to get to it, is how about those Arkansas Razorbacks? They crushed the state of Texas this year already. They won 20-10. But when I looked at this game, and once again, this is a game I got to watch the entirety of, I look at a couple of things here. First of all, this defense is awesome. I mean, it really, really is. But the thing that, I'll tell you what, Treylon Burks is just an incredible receiver for the Arkansas Razorbacks. KJ Jefferson, was 7 of 15, 212 yards, and 2 touchdowns. But the most impressive stat from Jefferson that I saw was he averaged 14 yards a pass, which means that when they start running the ball, Arkansas, and sustaining that running game, it opens up. What it does is it pushes the defenders on the other team up forward in the box, and then they go for the big play with Burks. And Burks, like I said, caught 6 passes, 167 yards. I mean, Arkansas looked like they were comfortable in that game. They didn't act like they were intimidated. And at the end of the day, number 7, Texas A&M, only scores 10 points on them.
Yeah, this game could have got even more ugly because you wonder what Arkansas would have done if Jefferson doesn't go down with his injury early in the second half, because they were driving on that drive and Malik Hornsby just couldn't get it together at the quarterback spot. And like you said, they loaded the box to stop the run early. And then Jefferson just beats him over the top. He had an 85-yard touchdown pass, a 50-yard touchdown pass, and Arkansas was up 17-0 early in the second quarter, and A&M just got overwhelmed. And once Arkansas hits you in the mouth, they're just a physical, powerhouse, smash mouth football team. And if you let them get a lead like that, I just don't think you can do anything in terms of trying to catch them. And then also the Aggies the game plan came into question for me. Why did Isaiah Spiller only get 12 carries? That should have been the focal point of your offense, especially with Zach Calzada being the backup quarterback against such a talented defense. He threw the ball way too much. And for me, they just put too much faith in Calzada. He had 151 and a pick. The O-line didn't do a great job keeping them comfortable. They had 12 pressures. Their best offensive lineman graded at like a 24 pass blocking grade. Overall, A&M played one of their worst games of the season, but you got to tip your hat to Sam Pittman, man. He has some boys playing physical, fast, tough, and right now, you're looking at if Arkansas pulls an upset this weekend, man, we can be coming in here next Tuesday talking about Arkansas potentially being the second-ranked team in the country.
Yep, absolutely. And I was going to go into that next segment. We're about a minute and a half away from Rob McClam coming on with us, writer and columnist for NC State. But in about a minute and a half, I want to discuss this last game with you. One of the games that surprised me, but not to the all ends. I didn't think North Carolina was a great team this year, and I questioned that at the beginning of the year. But the more I watch this North Carolina Tar Heel team play, I'm sorry, they may have one of the worst offensive lines in the FBS. I mean, 8 sacks, they couldn't get a running game, they couldn't open up any holes, and give Georgia Tech some credit for coming in and just destroying the Tar Heels.
Listen, I guess you could call me an honorary Georgia Tech fan. I root for this team so much. I love Jeff Sims at quarterback. I love Jahmyr Gibbs at running back. They both had huge games. Sims alone, 10 for 13, 112 in a one passing touchdown, but he also rushed for 128 yards and 3 rushing touchdowns. What a performance. And for me, this Georgia Tech team under Jeff Collins is going to be scary in the upcoming years. They're landing 4-star recruits. He's building a real program over there in Atlanta. The NIL is going to help Atlanta. It helped Georgia Tech in Atlanta so much. I've been vocal about it on our show. But for me, you just got to feel bad for Sam Howell, right? We could just admit that. If he had any sort of an offensive line, just imagine the numbers this kid. He's getting hit every play, and he still goes for 300 yards and 2 touchdowns, no turnovers. And he's getting hit every drop back. That's why I still have him as my number 1 quarterback in this upcoming draft class because, man, you could put a sled of tackling dummies in front of him, and he might have more time than he's had all season. I mean, you got to kind of feel for the guy because he's trying to put up these outrageous numbers, and he's getting hit every single time he takes a snap.
Yeah, and we'll talk more about that as we talk about next week's game after our talk with Rob McClam. But ladies and gentlemen, at this time is my great honor, thrill, and pleasure to introduce to you columnist of the Wilson Times. He covers the North Carolina State Wolfpack. Let's welcome in Rob McClam. Rob, how you doing today?
I'm doing well. How are you fellas?
We're doing good, buddy. Let me move that around to get you. There we go. Yeah, there you go. Hey, Rob, let me ask you this. Unbelievable game by the Wolfpack this weekend to defeat Clemson. Was it a bigger win for North Carolina State or a bigger loss for Clemson?
Well, Clemson had already lost the one game to Georgia, so they kind of knew where they were. NC State, it's a bigger win only because they had not beaten Clemson in so long. I think it was 8 straight and then 15 of 16 years. And for the Wolfpack, that's the bridge they have to cross. I mean, they're in the Atlantic Division. They can't escape Clemson. They have to deal with them every year. So if you want to be a champion, you have to deal with the Tigers. The value of the win will either grow or lessen as over the next 8 weeks. If NC State truly values this win, they'll approach the next 8 games the same way. If it could be a fleeting moment, or it could be a kickstart to something bigger and better for the Wolfpack instead of being a 7-8 or 9 win team every year. That's where they control their destiny. But it's a big win one way or the other. You cannot get to the point you want to get to where you compete for titles without dealing with the Clemson Tigers. You can do it if you're a coastal team. You can do it if you're North Carolina or Duke. You can't do it if you're NC State.
We're talking to Rob McClam, columnist of the Wilson Times, covers the North Carolina State Wolfpack. Let's talk real quickly about Devin Leary. I always say that I don't, and me and Zach were talking about this earlier on the show, I want to see what these kids do when they play a big name team like a Clemson, an Alabama, a Georgia, and so on and so on. Devin Leary, 32 of 44, 238 yards. He had 4 touchdowns. I know he was sacked 3 times, but he has over 1,000 yards passing this year, 10 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. Talk about the play of Devin Leary so far this year.
Well, my take on Devin Leary, I've told people at some point towards the back end of his career, he's going to be one of the better quarterbacks in the country. At some point, he's got to go through that door. Maybe the Clemson game will be that moment where he separates himself from most in the country. I think he's a great quarterback. I think he makes great decisions. Generally, he'll miss some of the long throws. Right now, that's probably the biggest problem with him is, they'll run the fades, they'll run the goes, and he's one-on-one, and he'll have the burner out there, and he's overthrowing those. When he connects on those throws, you're really going to see some numbers from him. But other than that, I think he's the guy for NC State that can take them to that level. I do believe that. He's augmented. He has a running game that augments what he does passing with the running backs at NC State, and that certainly helps. No one's out there teeing off on. You mentioned the 3 sacks, but they're not getting teed off on. No one's sitting back and sending in 7 because they know they're going to pass, or they're sitting back 7 waiting for that. NC State offense has great diversity, and that helps him too. But I'm a believer in Leary. I think he's a fantastic. He's not in the spiel of the NFL quarterbacks that NC State's had, but he's a top tier college quarterback.
And you're right about the offensive line, Rob. As I was watching some of the highlights of this game, and the one thing it looks like to me, and you would know more because you watch and play more, but it seems that offensive line seems to be inconsistent at times. And let me explain what I mean. When you look at last week's game, they were 11 of 21 on 3rd down conversions, which is excellent. Offensive line did an adequate amount of, an adequate job. But in their only loss versus Mississippi State, they only got 31 yards rushing, and Leary was sacked 4 times. It just seems that if they can consistently play like they did versus Clemson and a couple other games, then I just think that this team could go a long way, especially now with this ACC being so crazy with the amount of teams that are falling right now.
Well, the left tackle Ekwanyu was ACC Player of the Week for his game against Clemson, so they do have talent there. He'll probably play at the next level. Grant Gibson, the center, is very good. He could play at the next level as well. They have talent there. The Mississippi State game, that's another bridge NC State really needs to cross at some point. They've been curb stomped by the SEC, not just lately, but pretty much essentially over their entire history. I think the record in road games against the SEC is 115-1 all time. So they're playing teams in the SEC that are considered average in that conference, and they're not beating them. And that's really, when you juxtapose that to Clemson, if you look at the ACC, well, who is the team that I could see playing in the SEC and being successful? It's Clemson. And what has Clemson done? Essentially the same thing, beat them 15 to 16 years. So those really are sort of the 2 bridges they need to cross. Clemson at the ACC level, the SEC at the national level, they were not good at Mississippi State. And that was the worry going into the Clemson game. So, okay, that's the comparison. But they've grown, and that's what young teams tend to. If they take the coaching, if they improve, they do grow. Now, I think Mississippi State and I think SEC teams hit them 2 ways. I think they have more athleticism than NC State does. I don't think the Wolfpack have SEC athleticism, and I don't think the NC State has SEC depth, and that's where they really hurt a team like the Wolfpack. And if you look at the game against Mississippi State, they didn't have the rushing numbers, but they were also chasing points. And so when you're chasing points, your offense is not going to be as diverse. You're going to have to fling it around, and that really hurts NC State. They do their best work when you don't know what they're going to give you. If you know they're going to throw the ball, then you can tee off them because they don't have the speed again and the athleticism that those top tier teams have. But if you don't know what they do, if they're in a position where the game's in doubt, and even last year they played Liberty. Liberty was a top 20 team. They were losing in the fourth quarter, but the game was one score. It wasn't 2-3 scores like it was at Mississippi State. So they could still run the ball, and they ran the ball against Liberty to catch back up and win that game. When they can be diverse, they can play with most teams.
Rob, before we let Zach in here, I got a last question for you. We are talking to Rob McClam, columnist for the Wilson Times. Rob, balance the season. I look at some of the games at away first. You got Boston College 4-0. Miami, which hasn't been playing well, but it's always, for some reason, they're Miami. And then you got Wake Forest. All three of those games are away. We got right. Louisville and UNC. UNC, I think, ends the season as always this year. How do you see them matching up the rest of their schedule, conference-wise and overall?
I think they could beat all the teams, but I don't think they will beat all the teams. They need to make sure they beat the right teams. This actually game right here, they're playing Louisiana Tech. In theory, a loss would be the least painful because you can't hurt it doesn't hurt them in the ACC. They need to win those Atlantic Division games. They need to beat Wake Forest. They need to beat Boston College, Louisville, and then the crossover, of course, is North Carolina. You can't escape that. That's a rivalry game. So that's got value too. But they need to beat them Atlantic teams and get all the leverage they possibly can, because I don't see anyone in that division going 7-1 or that could be. Well, I take that back. That could be one of those where a 6-2 team does go to Charlotte to compete for the title, and you're going to need all the tiebreakers you can get. Wake Forest is great. That is a good football team. And and I will say historically, but over the last 20 years, NC State has had a hard time beating Wake Forest on the road. And historically, they have a losing record against Boston College, and that's at both home and away. Boston College is a hard place to play because the atmosphere is dead. You have to generate your own enthusiasm because they only get about 8,000 people there to come to a game. So this thing is not going to be easy. And I don't anticipate NC State coming out of this 11-1 and 8-0 in the conference. I just don't. So they need to make sure, that you don't want to stub your toe, but you need to make sure you beat the right teams. You can't let Wake Forest get one on you. If possible, you can't let Wake Forest and Boston College. You need to handle some business there in the Atlantic Division if you do want to compete for the conference title.
All right, I'm going to let Zach go ahead and jump in, buddy.
Yeah, man. So one of my favorite coaches in the country is Dave Doran at NC State. And I heard after the game, he offered something like 30, 40 recruits and was really plugging this win. How big of a win is this for the recruiting trail for NC State? And, just based on early returns, what were like the main reactions to all the recruits that were in attendance in Carter Finley this weekend?
Well, they love the atmosphere. Carter Finley's not going to blow you away with the 90,000 that a Doak or Death Valley does, but it gets loud. They let the kids down there low, and it can rock at times. It can literally rock at times, and so I think it's has a great ambiance to it. It's a great atmosphere. Generally, the kids do too. And if you beat Clemson or you have a great game like that, you got to hit while the iron's hot, and that's what he did with the offers there. He knew he wanted to offer those kids anyway, and so if that was a commitment he was willing to make, then you might as well do it when you're at your highest of highs. What will it do in terms of getting those kids to come? Time will tell. But I can't think of anyone who wouldn't want to be in that atmosphere at Carter Finley. When they play late evening or night games, it's a wonderful place to be at. You look at all the big wins they've had over Clemson and Florida State. Not a lot of against Clemson, but they've had some against Clemson and some against Florida State over the years, and they all seem to be nighttime games. They beat Lamar Jackson a few years ago at Louisville, nighttime game. That was a Thursday night game. So nighttime at Carter Finley is a wonderful experience coming out there with the fireworks and the wolf howling. And, I think it's a big one. He wants to mitigate what Mac Brown's doing pretty much. And you get guys like Dabo and them, they'll come in and get theirs. They come in. He get in Wake Forest and got Dexter Lawrence. That was a big blow for State a few years ago. But Mack Brown right now is sort of the hot commodity in terms of recruiting in the state of North Carolina, and Dave wants to mitigate that, and a win over Clemson is something that can he can show. So look, we don't dodge the big boys, and we can beat the big boys.
Right. And, what's the message around the program from this coaching staff? Because it's so easy to have a big letdown after a huge win like that. It's hard to get the team refocused after, beating one of the best teams of the country. So what is the message around the program to keep this team focused and, keep their eyes on the prize, which is eventually going to Charlotte to play for an ACC championship?
Well, right. He's mentioned that in the Monday press conference. He was kind of docile at that point. He was celebratory with the smoking the cigar after the game in his interview and the solo cup and all that. But now he's moved on, and generally they've been a win the day type of program since he's been there. This game, I think it's a non-conference game, but in terms of non-conference games, this is about the best you could hope for. Louisiana Tech has their attention. Louisiana Tech should have beat Mississippi State. They played Mississippi State a lot better than North Carolina State did. Louisiana Tech also should have beat SMU. It was at least should have went to overtime. It was a fluke play there at the end. Skip Holtz, he coached at East Carolina. His dad is the winningest coach or has the best winning percentage in NC State history. They know him. So this is probably, if you're going to face a team like this that can beat you, and Louisiana Tech can beat North Carolina State, and NC State could be ready and not overlook them and still lose this game. That's how good the Bulldogs are. But if you're going to play them, I think this is about the best time to play them, because you have to, okay, we got this team. They're very good. Then we get a week bye, and then we get the 6-game stretch where we try to play for an ACC title. Let's use this to our advantage. And so it's going to be interesting to see. But Louisiana Tech is not a pushover.
And, my last question is, let's just say everything plays out how some people think it is and NC State gets to Charlotte and wins that championship. What does it do for the program, and what does it do for, the legacy of Dave at NC State and what this team may accomplish this season?
Well, Dave is on the cusp of being the winningest coach. He's probably 2 years away, maybe. He would definitely get those 2 years. If he wins the ACC, now he's in the running as one of the best coaches or the best coach of all time in NC State history. Certainly, he's the second in terms of longevity. He's the second longest. It would be a lot of job security for people who clean up the streets, because Hillsborough Street in Raleigh would be a mess if NC State won. The kids stormed the bell tower at NC State on the campus after the win over Clemson. If they win an ACC title, Christ only knows. It might be like General Sherman marching through the South. I mean, they may burn things down, but it would be monumental for North Carolina State. It would be monumental for North Carolina State, not just on the auspices of the football program, but for the athletic department as a whole. This is a program that does not win enough conference titles. They don't. They just don't. And they have not had a major conference title in football since 1979, men's basketball 1989, baseball 1992. And I think that's the longest drought in P5 of all the P5 schools. So if it's not, it's right up there. It's certainly the longest in the ACC. So they need conference titles to say we can swing with the big boys. It would be huge. It would be huge just to get to that game, but to win that game in Charlotte would be it's hard to really describe in words how massive that would be for North Carolina State University.
And Rob, last question for me, and then we'll let you run here. Clemson, obviously 2 losses already this year, 1 in the conference, and I have a feeling this isn't their last loss of the season with the rest of their schedule coming up. My question to you is, with Clemson faltering off a little bit this year, how much more excitement is it building around the fan bases of the Wake Forest, the NC States, the Boston College, Louisville, maybe Syracuse, now saying, okay, where Clemson's been the team to beat, now everybody pretty much, based on how they perform the rest of the season, has a chance to go to Charlotte. What does that do for the ACC?
Well, it makes it probably depth-wise, it's not, or national perception-wise, it's not viewed as favorably. as you would if you had a playoff team like Clemson or Florida State like they were back in the day. But it's in terms of the ACC itself, these schools always tell themselves the same thing. There's going to be about a year every 4 or 5 where the door is ajar, and you have to be ready to kick the door in. And it's been many years, but in 06, Wake Forest won the ACC title. And in 07 and 08, Boston College won the Atlantic Division title. Those were teams that were built up by Tom O'Brien, who had left to come to NC State. Once Clemson and Florida State took off, they've had a vice grip on the Atlantic Division. They just haven't had an opportunity. NC State had a chance in 2010, and a chance in 2017. So they haven't had a lot of chances. And so when you get these opportunities, that's really, it's almost like, look, we don't get this every year, and we're not going to get this every year. We understand Clemson is a factory. We aren't. We know our place in this. We're pragmatic. We know what type of limitations we have when compared to Clemson. Clemson's an SEC school and an ACC. So when we get our shot, we better knock it out of the park. We better be ready. And that's where NC State's at right now. But at the same time, they're straddling the fence saying, if we're thinking about that ACC title now, we got 8 games left. There's a good chance we're going to stub our toe. And we may do it against Louisiana Tech. We may do it 2 or 3 times. As you mentioned, the schedule's tough. So they have to just win the day, and they have to focus on winning it and stripping it down to its simplest term. Win the rep, win the practice. And Wake Forest and Boston College, those schools, those are private schools. They have to play that way just to be competitive anyway. So they're already in that mindset. So it's going to be a lot of fun. It's going to be a lot of wondering, is this bowl game or that bowl game? They're already doing that in the forums. Trust me. NC State is already, well, I wonder if we'll go to the Fiesta. I mean, we're not even in October yet. So and they have that. Hey, amen to them. There's nothing wrong with having hope and having excitement for the future. But the kid, Doran has the task of separating that with the kids, saying, look, you're not going to get there if you don't win today. So you just got to focus on today and do what you got to do. And that's what it's going to take. And Clemson's down. So, but Clemson can still win 7-1. They could win the division. They could still get in there. If NC State's 6-2 and Clemson 7-1, it doesn't matter. You have to make that game have ultimate value. You have to treat the next 8 weeks the same way you treated that Clemson game. And that's their task.
Absolutely. All right, Robert, we want to thank you very much for joining us on our College Football Tuesday show. We really appreciate it, my friend.
My pleasure, y'all. You have a nice evening.
All right, you too, and good luck.
Thank you.
All right, that was Rob McClam from the Wilson Times joining us tonight. Let's take a quick 15-second station break to allow our stations to identify themselves. And when we come back, Zach and I will talk about this upcoming weekend, which another great week in college football. You are watching Frankly Speaking Sports, live from Charlotte, North Carolina. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Frankly Speaking Sports. And, I love listening to different people, Zach, when it pertains to especially a team they cover. And, when you listen to Rob, to be quite frank with you, he's right. NC State has as good as a chance to win this as anybody.
Yeah, I mean, and he understands the road in front of them and that they still have to execute what they do best. So, I mean, it seems like cautious optimism, and like he understands how tough this ACC is really going to be. You could say that it's been down this year. It's been crazy, but there's still some really good teams on that schedule. So he understands that they still have to go out there and win their games.
Yeah. And, talking about going out and winning games, we started off, let's not prolong anything here. Let's start right off with the first game of the week. And I hate that it's a 12 o'clock noon game, only because I think this should be a primetime game where, it's on at night like 8 o'clock, but I don't make the schedule. But when you talk about a defensive matchup, that's what you're getting when you get Arkansas and Georgia. They don't have the high-profile quarterbacks. I mean, JT Daniels is not that great of a quarterback. I think that's one thing we've learned this year. He's a good quarterback, but I wouldn't call him, the upper echelon of quarterbacks. That's just my opinion. Meanwhile, you have Arkansas, who's averaging 261 yards per game. They're 17th in the nation. And you know what? The one guy that they got to watch out for here, if you're Georgia in this game, and we talked about it earlier, this running game has been very good for Arkansas. So what it does is it opens up the big play, and Treylon Burks is the big playmaker on the team. Listen to this. The last 2 games, okay, he's been averaging, and this is not incorrect, 35 yards a catch. 35 yards a catch. Now, take for granted 2 of those were an 85-yard bomb he caught and a 91-yard that he caught. But this is a team where, and it's going to be pretty similar to the game we talked about earlier, is if Arkansas can hang tough in the first half with Georgia and show that they can play, which I really believe they can on the defensive side of the ball, and then score, make no mistakes, and go ahead and get some points on the board, not only can they win this game, but I really, really honestly believe that the difference in this game could be a mistake by Daniels or a mistake by Jefferson.
Yeah, I mean, the number one thing for Georgia is just to do what you usually do on offense, is stay balanced. Run your 3 running back set, and then also open up some play action for JT Daniels, which has been his most efficient, I guess, concept in the offense. And for Arkansas is simple. Until someone can stop the run game, the key to every game Arkansas plays is to establish the run game. Because you can control the time of possession, you got to limit turnovers, and you just have to play smash mouth football. You got to bring it to Georgia, which has not been done in a long time against this Bulldogs defense. But the matchup to watch for me is KJ Jefferson and this running back unit against these linebackers, man. This linebacking unit for Georgia is legit. Nakobe Dean might be the best linebacker in the country. You got Channing Tindall back there. The edge guys in Nolan Smith and Adam Anderson are absolutely legit. If Georgia can stop the run, I think this one gets out of hand. So Arkansas has to find a way to establish their running attack, because if they become one-dimensional, I just don't know if they have the talent to upset a Georgia team on the road right now.
Yeah, and it should be interesting, and I agree with you. The key to this game, you mentioned Jefferson, is to keep Jefferson one-dimensional. If they can keep Jefferson and contain that running game, like you said, of Arkansas, now you're forcing Jefferson to throw the ball, and we all know he's a heck of a lot better scrambler than he is a passer. And that's no discredit towards him. It's just a known fact that when he can run the ball, it opens up so much more for him offensively, and they can't key on one actual thing that he does. So should be a good game. Like you said, it's in Sanford Field in Georgia. So, obviously the home team. But I would definitely say here, and I don't think there's any disagreement, that if Arkansas goes in here and defeats, I don't care how many points. I don't care if it's 1 point or 40 points, but you got to put them in the top 5.
I think you put them in top 2. Name a team other than Alabama that's been more impressive.
Well, I agree, but you see Oklahoma win this week. You know there's going to be people that, I never trust the writers. I'm sorry. I just –
Well, I think you could say, even if they're not number 2 in the rankings, there needs to be a consensus that they're probably the second best team in the country right now.
Right,
in terms of on-the-field performance. Like, yes, preseason rankings sadly play a part in the AP poll right now, but with Oklahoma, it looks like the writers are starting to take notice that they're not playing very well. They dropped them, 2 spots this past week in the AP poll? So for me, it shows that they're dropping, and then the only thing that can get in the way of Arkansas is if Cincinnati blows out Notre Dame. Because that's a huge, huge top 10 win. If they win by 2-3 touchdowns, Cincinnati would also have to go up. And then how do you weigh Oregon's win at Ohio State, Arkansas's win at Georgia, and then at the same time weigh Cincinnati's win over Notre Dame? There's going to be a bottleneck of teams that feel like they have an argument for that number 2 spot. And then also on the flip side, how would the media look at Georgia after losing to Arkansas? That's the big thing. But the fact that Georgia's almost 20-point favorites, I would imagine the media might drop them down to probably that 8-9 spot.
All right. Well, let's go on. This game, I don't know what to do on this game, buddy, because every week I seem to go against Notre Dame. But the one thing I do like about Cincinnati is, okay, you know about Notre Dame, Jack Cohn, what he's done. We know about Mike Mayer, the unbelievable tight end for Notre Dame. But the one guy that I like, and I want to see if I wrote his name down, want to make sure. Yeah, I did. Jerome Ford. Okay, that's of Cincinnati. That's who Notre Dame is going to have to key on and stop if they want. He's rushed for a couple 100-yard games this year, but Cincinnati is not a slouch team. We all know that. I mean, sometimes they don't get enough credit, I think, because of the conference they play in. But this is a good Cincinnati team, and I don't want to say. I think they can beat Notre Dame, but I thought Wisconsin can beat Notre Dame too. And look what happened. But Notre Dame, at the end of the day, I guess it's not how you win. I guess it's not how pretty you look when you win. At the end of the day, it's whether you win or not. And Notre Dame 4-0.
I don't want to go on too. I didn't pick a outrageous score. But I think it's more likely that Cincinnati beats Notre Dame by 3 touchdowns than Notre Dame wins this game, in my opinion. I don't even know if it's going to be close if this plays out like I think it might, because this Cincinnati secondary, in my opinion, is absolutely legit. And Notre Dame has shown time and time again that they cannot consistently run the ball. And I'll just dare you to go ahead and try to throw against the secondary, because they're only allowing 160 yards passing a game for Cincinnati. They were top 10 in the country in pass defense last year. In my opinion, they have the best cornerback in the country in Ahmad Gardner, and he's only allowed 2 catches this year and has never allowed a touchdown pass on him for his whole career. 3 years. Never allowed a touchdown pass in his entire career. Only allowed 2 catches this year. And then on top of that, you look at Kobe Bryant, not the K, it's with a C this time, guys. I know that throws people off. His name is Kobe Bryant, and Arquan Bush are the other DBs to watch. Both of them are allowing under a 43% catch rate against them. So where do you throw it? Because you can't throw it at Gardner, because he's going to either pick it off or break it up. And then Bush and Bryant have been outstanding. Their other safety, I'm blanking on his name. I believe it's Derek Forrest, if I'm not mistaken, but he's kind of the weak spot. But on the outside of this Cincinnati defense, you just can't throw on them. They're just that good. And if there's a game where Jack Cohen cannot just air the ball out, it's this one. I think they're a matchup nightmare, because this Notre Dame front 7, they stopped the run game last week against Wisconsin. The problem is Desmond Ridder is no Graham Mertz. Desmond Ridder is a legit Heisman candidate, and he also is a dual threat quarterback who can beat you with his legs, he can beat you with his arm, and then you on top of that have Jerome Ford. I just think right now Cincinnati, on paper, in my opinion, is much more talented than Notre Dame, and I think they're going to be so motivated. They're coming off a bye week, and the storyline to watch in this game, man, Notre Dame stole Cincinnati's defensive coordinator, Marcus Freeman, this offseason. So that Cincinnati defense is going to be looking to make a statement like, man, you left us for this team. And I think Marcus Freeman is going to be on the same side of that. But for me, Desmond Ridder, this offense is too good for Cincinnati to lose this game. I think Cincinnati wins this one convincingly.
All right, we move on to Mississippi, Alabama, what I consider possibly could be the 2 best quarterbacks in the nation. I mean, Matt Corral of Mississippi, and then, of course, Bryce Young of Alabama. But, when I look at Matt Corral and what he's done at Mississippi, the most impressive thing of his statistics, listen to this, he's thrown just under 1,000 yards for the year. 9 touchdowns, but the big number for me is 0 interceptions. The guy doesn't make a lot of mistakes when he's quarterbacking. We know what Bryce Young does. I mean, 15 touchdowns this year, 1 interceptions. This is a game that, I think Alabama is the better team. There's no doubt about that. But the way things have been playing out this year, I never want to discredit anybody, winning versus anybody. But I believe this game is in Alabama. So I would think, So all the, I would think Alabama wins this game. But I would really like to see how Matt Corral does against Alabama.
Yeah, the thing about Ole Miss for me, though, is they just haven't played anybody. I mean, does Tulane, Austin Peay, and Louisville really, raise any, impressive wins for you? And plus, they haven't played a true road game all year either, while Alabama has been tried and tested in the swamp, in prime time, in 2:30 time slot, and that place was rocking, and they found a way to win. They've been more tested. And the number one thing I don't love about Ole Miss, man, that defense is not that good, in my opinion. I really don't think that defense is as good as people think. They're allowing almost 350 yards per game, and I just named you their 3 opponents. I mean, you can't be giving up 350 to Austin Peay and Tulane. That's just not going to cut it, because Alabama is going to come at you with full force. I do not see this game being close, man. I'm going to be honest with you. I'm actually, dropping my preview for this game tomorrow, but I think Alabama could cover the 14.5-point spread. I really do. Being in Tuscaloosa, Nick Saban knows what happened last year when Ole Miss gave them all they wanted and more in Oxford. But for me, I just think that defense for Ole Miss is just not good enough. I think Bryce Young has a giant day. Jamison Williams is too good at wide receiver. And I just think the secondary for Alabama is the strength of this defense.
Right.
I think Matt Corral has 2 or 3 interceptions this weekend. I don't think he's going to play well. I'm not a huge Matt Corral guy. I don't think he's I don't think he's as good as people think he is. So for me, I think Matt Corral chokes it up this weekend. I think Alabama runs away with this one to Bryant-Denny.
Yeah, and we'll see, because Corral, obviously likes to team up with Ontario Drummond, who's having an incredible year. Like you said, they really haven't played anyone. So that's why I said I want to see how he does versus Alabama, because if he can come in here and show that he can play at top level versus Alabama, then that changes the story around a little bit about what we think of this young man as a quarterback. But once again, you got to play the big boys to be treated like a big guy. So,
well, it's just so hard. He's so consistent, Tom, because you can have these 3 great performances, but then I think it was Arkansas. He goes out and throws 6 interceptions in a game and chokes it away last year. So it's just what Matt Corral are you going to get? He's in that gunslinger mold. He has a huge arm, but for me, it's just I think it's a bad recipe if your number one thing you're going to try to do against Alabama is pass. You're going to have to run the ball against this defense. And so I just think, and also if it was in Oxford, it might be a different story. But man, to go into Bryant-Denny and win is a whole different animal than trying to win in your home stadium against Alabama.
All right, buddy. One of the games I wrapped up the summary part of it here would be number 25. They're still ranked, Clemson versus Boston College, who is not ranked, okay, who is 4-0. Okay, once again, I never understand some of these things, but this game is in BC. And we know what Boston College has done. We know Clemson is playing low, but can you see Clemson losing 2 big games in a row?
Yeah, the fact that this spread is 15.5 points, can someone please explain to me what Clemson has done this year to be 15-point favorites over Boston College?
Was my next question. I was going to ask you
that
why.
That is absolutely insane. And when you look at Boston College finding a way to win over a strong SEC team in Missouri, who's probably a top 3 or 4 SEC East team was impressive. I thought the defense played very well for Boston College at times. It's just going to depend on, can they run the ball against Clemson? Because if you can replicate what NC State did and run the ball consistently, open up the field for your quarterbacks, that's going to be the whole thing. Grossel has to have a big game. And then on the flip side, the thing about Clemson is, like, how do they cover 15.5 points when they don't have a running back? Their one running back that has done anything on the ground is Alton Shipley, and Pace, and I believe it's I'm blanking on the other kid's name who they thought was Lynn J. Dixon. I don't know if Clemson's going to be able to run the ball. And do you trust DJ on the road to go out and make the throws against Boston College to win this game? I personally don't. I absolutely think this is one of my picks for upset alert this weekend. I don't know. I don't have an official pick yet because this game was on later on our schedule, but I think Clemson is completely on upset alert. And if they come in, I want to see where the mindset is for Clemson. You've been a dynasty for so many years, been a top 4 team for like 8 years now. How do you feel now that you're number 25 in the country and potentially we could be looking at a 2-3 Clemson team by the end of Saturday night?
What happened? What happened? Let's just go hypo for a minute here. Hypothetically, Clemson loses. What does this do to the Clemson program?
Oh man, it brings everything into question. It brings in everything, that whole culture Dabo preaches about. It brings in questions about, because he doesn't take transfers in, because he said that he likes to build his culture through high school recruits, and we don't need anyone's else's players. Well, you better hit the transfer portal, because right now y'all suck. I mean, to be completely honest. And then you have to look at him and be like, how much was his success built on Deshaun Watson, Trevor Lawrence, and Travis Etienne? I don't think we gave those players enough credit for what they did for Clemson. I mean, everyone said, oh, it's Clemson. Trevor Lawrence isn't that good because he was at Clemson with this, and this. Well, it's like it was on Trevor Lawrence right now, doesn't it? With DJ playing like he is. It's looking a lot like it was Travis Etienne, because Clemson can't run against anybody. Georgia Tech out physical you at the line of scrimmage. That can't happen. And when you're looking, Tony Elliott, the offensive coordinator, and Brent Venables, the defensive coordinator, have been the hottest assistant coaches on the market. Tony Elliott, Auburn offered him the head coaching job, and he turned it down. I bet you he probably wishes he might have, struck while the iron was hot, because who's calling Tony Elliott right now after seeing what they're putting on the field on offense? I'm not calling Tony Elliott. Venables is fine because the defense isn't the problem. Let's just be honest. He'll be okay. But you got to look at that and be like, who's going to take control of the offense? And if you're Dabo, as loyal as you were to your assistants, you got to clean house this offseason, because something isn't right. You have to prove that you weren't carried by generational talents in Watson, Lawrence, and Etienne. And for me, it's going to put that whole quote unquote, as Dabo puts it, Clemson culture on the hot seat. Let's see if it sticks together when the seat is on absolute fire.
Yeah. Now, a couple of questionable games. I didn't put them up here. We'll talk about them. And we got a fan. James wants to know Oklahoma, what you think of this. What you should pick. He said, "Hey guys, can you help me on this pick? Oklahoma State -4 versus Baylor."
This one's tough, because these two teams they're both 4-0, but I have so many questions about both of them because of just the who they've played. But Oklahoma State has a big win over Boise State on the road, on the blue turf. They beat Kansas State last week, who was ranked. But Baylor upset Iowa State last week, who was the 14th ranked team in the country. And they have big wins over Kansas, Texas Southern, and Texas State. For me, just based on what they're building, I'm going to go with Baylor here in an upset. So I would take Baylor in terms of, take the points of Baylor, take those 4 points, because I think they potentially could make a big statement by beating Oklahoma State this weekend.
All right, I'm going to ask you your team, the 22nd ranked team, the Auburn Tigers. They play LSU. How do you see them faring? And if I'm correct on my report, they play in LSU.
Yeah, Auburn will be looking for their first win in Death Valley since 1999. They have not won in Death Valley since 99. I was 2 years old the last time they won in Death Valley. So that shows you how long it's been. Bo Nix got benched last weekend. TJ Finley, who, funny, came from LSU this offseason and was the LSU starting quarterback for the Auburn LSU game last year on the other side. So Auburn has a little bit of a quarterback battle. All signs point to Nix potentially still getting the starting job. Now, for me, the question is, what's going to give? I think Auburn's defense is slightly better than what LSU is bringing, especially in the front seven. But Derek Stingley is potentially out this weekend in the secondary, which is a huge loss for LSU. And also, can Max Johnson put together a good performance? And can LSU run the ball? LSU is only averaging 80 yards per game on the ground this week. Coming into this week. That cannot work this weekend. As much as, I've probably picked against Auburn more since we started our show than I've picked them. I think I've only picked them twice, and I'm 1-1 in those picks. I just have a weird feeling, man. They had a struggle last week against Georgia State. Mississippi State gave LSU all they wanted. Because of the run game, I trust Tank Bigsby to make some plays on the road for Auburn. And I do think Auburn pulls out a very, very close upset over LSU in Death Valley and gets their first win since 1999. I would say this game has the potential, man, to be like a 16-13, a 13-10 type of game. I don't think it's going to be very high scoring. I just think Auburn is going to run the ball more. They're going to shorten up the game. And what's going to happen is they're just going to have one more possession to put some points on the board. And so I think Auburn squeaks it out over LSU this weekend in Death Valley.
Well, I got a game here that caught my eye, okay? May not catches the country's eyes, but it caught my eye, and I'd love to get your pick. ACC, Pittsburgh versus Georgia Tech. Pittsburgh is undefeated. A lot of people don't realize that Pittsburgh has not lost yet this season. How do you think they fare going into Georgia Tech?
Yeah, they lost. They lost to Western Michigan, actually, 2 weeks ago out of everybody.
Really?
Yeah, they lost to Western Michigan 44-41.
Oh, you're right. They're 3-1.
Yep.
Right, Pittsburgh's 3-1. I'm sorry. 3-1 this year.
Okay, so this might sound crazy. I'm going Georgia Tech all the way here. I think Georgia Tech is just on that path. Kenny Pickett, though, I will say this. Kenny Pickett right now, other than Sam Hartman, has probably been the best quarterback in the ACC. He has almost 1,400 yards passing, 15 touchdowns, and 1 turnover. Outstanding. But the thing they can't do is run the ball efficiently. They cannot run the ball for anything. So especially against good defenses, for me, I think Sims and Jahmyr Gibbs does exactly what they did to UNC and Clemson. They play smash mouth football. I think Pickett makes 1 or 2 mistakes on the road to give this game away. I have Georgia Tech with the upset over Pitt this weekend.
Beautiful. Now it's your turn. Any games, and there's plenty of games going on that we didn't mention that catches your eyes, that a game that should be watched?
Friday night. Y'all better stop making plans on Friday night. 7 o'clock on FS1. Number 5 Iowa travels to Maryland, who's also undefeated. Talia Tagovailoa, I know y'all know that name. Tua's little brother is the quarterback for Maryland. They've looked legit. I actually have Maryland pulling the upset this weekend over number 5 Iowa. That's a top 5 upset on the road. I don't believe in Iowa, man. As good as that defense is, on the road, you're going to have to do more than just run the ball up the middle, man. I think Maryland is too explosive in terms of their offense. I mean, they're averaging like 500 yards a game, while I was averaging like 290. They can run the ball with Fleet Davis. Demas Jr. at wide receiver is legit. Talia has 1,400 yards passing, 10 touchdowns, 1 turnover. I just think they're going to air it out over Iowa, and I think Maryland pulls off the huge upset on Friday night. And you know how it is, man. Friday night, top 5 matchups on the road, just chalk it up to someone getting upset. You look at Virginia Tech over UNC to start the season. You look at the history of college football. If you're playing on Friday or Thursday night and you're a top 10 team on the road, you better buckle up because it's going to be a ride. I think Maryland pulls it out over Iowa this weekend in a huge top 5 upset.
Okay, off the text line. Ready? If Georgia should lose to Arkansas, of course, so they're planning on Georgia losing, does Florida have a chance being 3-1 if they go undefeated the rest of the season to make the playoffs? That's a tough one because the SEC
I don't
have
think
to play Alabama, right, for the SEC title.
Yeah, I would say no because they would have 2 losses because they'd have to play Alabama again in the SEC championship if they went undefeated. Because
Which
that means
means they would have
Georgia.
to beat Alabama this time to get into the playoffs.
Yeah, they would have to win the SEC championship. If they did that, they would get in. If they won out and won their rematch against Alabama, they would get in, and that would be the worst case scenario for Cincinnati, Notre Dame, and for whoever the potential like Big Ten champion was, because Alabama's getting in the playoffs. If their only loss is the SEC title, Alabama's in the playoffs, and then you got to put Florida in, and then you got 2 spots for the Pac-12, Big Ten, Big 12, Cincinnati, and Notre Dame to fight over those last 2 spots. Good luck, playoff committee. I do not envy your job in that situation.
Zach, tell me what you think about the emergence of Michigan this year.
It all starts with the running game, man. Tough defense, which they've had for a few years now, and the running game. They've rushed for 300-plus yards in every game this year. I don't care. You could talk about their strength of schedule. That is legit. And Rutgers gave them a tough run, but I think Rutgers is a decent team this year. They're not great, but they're not the old Rutgers they're not the old Rutgers that would just get beat by 70 by everybody. They found a way to win a close game. This weekend, we're going to find out a lot about Michigan against Wisconsin. But for me, if you're looking at Ohio State with that horrible run defense, you are terrified for Michigan coming to town with that running game they have. It's all started with the run game, man. That offense is finally doing well. They're running the ball. They're keeping Cade McNamara out of trouble. It's only high percentage throws, which keeps turnovers low, and they have a perfect recipe to win games in the Big Ten. Play good defense, run the ball, and don't turn the ball over. That's the key to success for Michigan right now. Is
it fair to have Fresno State at number 18?
I think so. I mean, you look at their one loss was a 6-point loss to Oregon, who's the number 3 team in the country, who had a chance to win that game. That was their only loss. They've beat UCLA. They've upset everyone they played. They had a tough game last week. UNLV gave them everything. But what I think happens is fans are too quick to punish these smaller teams for their close wins or struggle wins, but they keep making excuses for the Georgias and Alabamas and the Iowas. Well, if you're going to penalize Fresno State for almost losing to UNLV, then why didn't Iowa drop in the rankings? They almost lost to Colorado State, who got beat by 25 by an FCS team. We got to start punishing everyone fairly. So if you're going to excuse all these big Power 5 teams for their close losses, let's not punish Fresno State for one bad game. They've been waxing everyone on their schedule. Fresno State's legit, and when you look at them, they're in the lead for the Mountain West, shockingly, even over Boise State and San Jose State, which is a huge statement for that team. And they got a legit Heisman contender in that quarterback, too.
Before we wrap it up, we talked about this team earlier in the season as being somebody to watch. I remember you mentioning it, but they quietly move up on the radar without anybody noticing it, and that's Coastal Carolina.
Yep. They just keep winning, man. That's the whole recipe for Coastal Carolina. Keep winning convincingly, and just every week, regardless of how it is, just make sure there's a W in that column. I would have no doubt that at the end of the season, there's a good chance Coastal Carolina is 12-0 again. And then you're wondering, man, if they win let's say they win their bowl game in terms of like a New Year's Six bowl, that playoff expansion is coming down the pipeline. How big is that for Coastal Carolina to potentially even get a playoff bid moving forward? So even though the playoffs probably aren't in reach for them right now, they just keep winning, and they're setting themselves up for the future, and recruits are noticing that. They have so many guys. Coastal Carolina, off the top of my head, will have, I would say in this next draft, at least 4 or 5 guys drafted, which is going to make a statement. And then Grayson McCall, the quarterback, in 2 years, I think could be a first-round pick, probably a top 10 pick at quarterback. He's that good. In my opinion, in terms of overall potential, Grayson McCall is the best quarterback in the country. I don't even think it's an argument.
And do you think when a team like Coastal Carolina, I remember UCF a couple of years ago in Florida, they go whatever and 0, 12 and 0, 11 and 0, however many games they play. Does that help the argument for an expansion in playoffs?
Absolutely. And what they have to do is start winning the bowl games. Do like it. You remember when Utah beat Alabama in 09, Boise State beat Oklahoma in 06, UCF beat Auburn. If you start going in there and winning or coming close to winning these bowl games, it puts you on the map. And you can use all the arguments. Oh, we're not motivated. This player did this. I don't want to hear any excuses. You got to suit up and go play that game. Cincinnati was one play away from beating Georgia last year. How big of a statement was that? Realistically, I mean, how many people thought Cincinnati was even going to be in that game? I don't think many. And so winning those bowl games only adds to it. We've talked about, what I've said on my show. I've been so vocal that the group of 5 gets disrespected. I think Cincinnati right now, you could argue, is better than probably 3 or 4 teams ranked above them right now. You're telling me that you would be confident betting that Iowa would beat Cincinnati right now, I think you'd be lying. If you're confident that Penn State would blow out Cincinnati, I think you'd probably be lying as well. I think they're better than a lot of these teams. And right now, as crazy as it sounds, I think Cincinnati would be the favorite over Oklahoma right now in terms of a one-on-one matchup. And I don't even think Oregon would be a confident pick over Cincinnati right now as well. So for me, I just think we got to stop disrespecting these group of 5 teams, because with the addition of the transfer portal and the national expansion of recruiting, these group of 5 teams aren't your average mid-2000 group of 5 teams. They got real Power 5 talent. And right now, you're seeing it on the FCS level. This year was the year that they set the record already. It's week 5. More FCS teams have beat FBS teams than any other time in history. They have like 11 or 12 wins over the FBS, and South Dakota State beat Colorado State by like 25. Montana beats Washington, a ranked team, in primetime on the road. The transfer portal has changed college football. It's time to stop. I think we should get rid of the distinction group of 5 and Power 5 anyway. I've been vocal about that. But to disrespect the team just because they're not in a certain conference is ridiculous. I mean, the Cincinnati's moving to the Big 12 right now, man. Would you feel, if I told you right now that Cincinnati could win the Big 12, would you have any evidence to disagree with that?
No.
I think they'd be the best team in the Big 12 this year. So I just think people got to stop, putting labels on it. Just because a team's group of 5 doesn't mean they can't compete. And you've watched college football for so long, any given Saturday, anyone could be beat. So to say that if you let them in the playoffs that they would never win, that doesn't make any sense. You watch March Madness. How many times has the 12, 13, 14 seed consistently beat one of the top seeds? You're going to say that can't happen in football, that if you put group of 5s in, that they would never win a football game? I just don't think you could say that, because like I just said, any given Saturday you can be beat if you don't bring your best.
I agree with you. Now, Cincinnati can prove a lot to people this weekend by beating Notre Dame to justify what you just said, because it will justify exactly what you said. But I'll give you one last scenario just for the sake of having some fun here before we wrap it up. Cincinnati beats Notre Dame. Arkansas beats Georgia. Who's ranked ahead?
Cincinnati, in my personal opinion. I think Cincinnati would be ranked ahead. But so in my personal opinion, I would rank Cincinnati ahead. The AP poll would put Arkansas ahead, just because I think they view Georgia as a bigger win.
Right. That's what I was going to ask.
Yeah, the AP poll would have Arkansas higher. I personally would keep Cincinnati higher, just because I personally think that Cincinnati right now would beat Arkansas. That's just how I do my rankings. Like, I think of, one, what does your resume look like as we move down, but who would win a one-on-one matchup? And right now, I moved Cincinnati above Oklahoma in my rankings this week on our channel, as I think Cincinnati would beat Oklahoma right now. And personally, I would, if that scenario happens, my rankings would probably be Alabama. I would probably keep Oregon at 2, Cincinnati 3, Arkansas 4 right now, if that scenario happened this weekend. But the AP poll would probably move Arkansas to number 2 in the country, which I don't think, if I would have came on your show the first time you had me and said Arkansas would be potentially the number 2 team in the country by September or whatever it's going to be, October 3rd or 2nd. Yeah, October. If I told you Arkansas would be second ranked in the country by October 2nd, you probably would have never invited me back on. You'd have been like, this dude is on some sort of drug, something. But that's why I love college football, man. Who would have ever thought Arkansas would be a top 5 team potentially in the country?
It's amazing. You saw glimpses last year, but, you took everything last year with a grain of salt because of the COVID year and everything. And Arkansas was one of those teams last year, if you remember, that actually ended up with a tougher schedule than they originally had because they only played SEC opponents last year, which, arguably is the best college football conference. We could argue that all day long. But so, they did unbelievable last year. And, as we end the show, I will say right now, Coach, if things ended today, I'm sorry, you may disagree with me, but I would give Sam Pittman Coach of the Year.
He already deserves it. You might as well just wrap up the voting right now. I think right now you could.
Well, there's we'll still got a lot of games left.
Listen, even if Arkansas loses 3 games moving forward, you still got to give it to them. I mean, when you look at their schedule, they still have Georgia, Alabama, Ole Miss, Auburn, LSU. I mean, dude, what kind of schedule did I always made a joke on our show. Arkansas must have pissed off the SEC in some past life or something because they consistently get the short end of the stick in every scheduling matter. If I'm Arkansas, I'm like, man, can I get moved divisions once Oklahoma and Texas get here? Can I please move from this Alabama division? Because this is getting ridiculous.
Yeah, it's incredible, but it's awesome too because you get to see some great football over there. Well, listen, buddy, that about wraps it up for us on another week of College Football Tuesday. We want to thank Rob McClam, who covers NC State for the Wilson Times, for joining us today. Ladies and gentlemen out there, it's a wild week again, and it starts early this week as that Arkansas-Georgia game is the noon game. So, wake up early. That's in Georgia, about 4 hours where I'm staying. So, we want to wish the Razorbacks some luck there. But it should be a great weekend. And both Zach and myself will be back Tuesday to preview it for you and to go ahead and preview the upcoming games the following week. On behalf of all of us here on College Football Tuesday, good night.